great pleasure to introduce Dr. K.Luiz. Now, Dr. K.Luiz happens to be my daughter, K.Luiz. So I want you to know this is a case of blatant nepotism. And without further ado, the floor is yours.
I'm very excited and happy that my mother finally decided to consent to have nepotism with me. Nepotism. And I thought I would tell you a dream that I had about my mother when I was 16, because it's a very good example of how to work with pre-analytic patients. And the dream was that she was in the shower, and it was a marble shower with glass doors and super, super sexy. And my mother started to soap her breasts, and then she moved down, and my 14-year-old daughter's there, fortunately, she's PG-13. And then she started to move down her body and soap her penis, which was hard. I came into the bathroom and I started to make love to her breasts. And then I moved down and I started to suck her penis. At which point I woke up. And when I woke up from this dream, I was horrified and disgusted and disturbed. It was the most horrible dream that I had ever had. And I couldn't look at my mother for days. I just couldn't look her in the eye. It was so real and so upsetting. And finally, after a few days, she said to me, "Is something wrong?" Because I was acting so strangely. And because a few days had passed and the feelings of arousal had worn off, I told her. I said, "You were in the shower and you were seducing me." And I told her what had happened. And I looked at her face, and she had this look of pleasure on her face. And I said, "Doesn't that upset you?" And she said, "It's a wonderful dream." I said, "What is wonderful about this dream?" She said, "I've always wanted a penis." And it made me realize that it was just a dream, first of all. And then she explained to me that it was an infantile dream, and that when you're an infant, the mother doesn't have a penis or breasts or anything. It's just a sort of a state, and that I had a dream that was in that state, so I didn't feel responsible for it. And that's how you work with pre-analytic patients. You reassure them that everything that's happening, which is usually outside of themselves, is really okay. So that fits in with the nepotism. That was my introduction. I want to talk to you today. I have a mandate, which is I'm supposed to define what pre-analytic is, and then talk about what kind of interventions we make, which are different for interventions with the analytic patient, and then how do you move a patient into analysis. So that's a pretty heavy load. And I want to take questions from you to find out what you are interested in. But before we get into that, I want to just tell you how I became good at keeping patients, which is I used to not be able to keep patients. Faye Newsom is here. She can attest to this. I would hang steady at 6 patients who are all schizophrenics or very regressed people, and I could do psychoanalysis with them. And then I would climb my way up to 11 or 12 people, and in the blink of an eye, I would just go back down to 6 people. And this went on forever and ever. And I remember Faye Newsom saying, "Oh, are we back down to 6? Are we due to be back down to 6? And then an interesting thing happened, which is that I got my LMHC and I got on insurance panels. And once I got on the insurance panels, I started to get a huge number of referrals, like 2 or 3 referrals a week. And I didn't feel that these were real analytic patients because they were being paid through insurance. So to me, they were like throwaway patients. Also, I wasn't getting paid very much money, so I felt like I didn't care if I kept them or not. And that, I think, made a huge difference in how I worked, because I no longer felt that work was so analytic or so important. As this started, and now I'm climbing up to, 18 patients, 20 patients, because so many people were coming in. And one of these patients was a 21-year-old girl, and she was fascinating. She was super interested in psychoanalysis, and she had studied at the Chicago School. The Chicago School of Psychoanalysis is a fascinating place. She'd studied Jung and Freud, and she came in, she was reading all this stuff, and she was a big fan of Ram Dass. Have any of you heard of Ram Dass? Yeah. So he's a healer. Who hasn't heard of Ram Dass? He's a healer that came out of Harvard University in the psychology department and started to experiment with LSD, which was all about expanding consciousness and breaking down the barriers of the mind. Now, I had been raised on modern psychoanalysis. So I started studying here when I was 21. I had to fight and kick and scream for Cy Meadow to let me study at the school because he said I was too young. But I took the first year of life here, and I didn't take any psychology in college because I only wanted modern psychoanalysis. So I was a true blood modern analyst, working with transference and resistance. That's all I knew, that's all I thought worked. And when I learned about Ram Dass, I looked at a documentary of him, and they showed him giving a session to a patient. And this was the most unbelievable session I had ever seen in my life. And I will now describe this session to you because it just blew my mind. Patient rings the doorbell, and Ram Dass greets the patient at the door, opens the door, sees the patient, and they hug. Big embrace. Oh my God, they're hugging each other. They walk into Ram Dass's office. The patient sits on the couch, and Ram Dass sits next to the patient on the couch and puts his hand on her knee. Okay. Okay, 3 rules already broken here. Then she starts to tell him that she broke up with her boyfriend. Ram Dass starts to cry. So, okay. And thinking this is just this is one of the world's greatest healers. He's got a following of whatever. And then they interviewed this girl to ask her what this experience was like for her of working with Ram Dass. And she explained that in that moment when he broke down and cried, she had a feeling she had never had before from anybody that had raised her, and how healing it was for her to have that kind of experience. Well, this just blew my mind open to what therapy was, what healing was, and I started to work with patients in a completely free way after that. Because to me, it was, I had the permission, after watching this Ram Dass thing, that anything goes. So I started to work with patients, and then I realized at one point that every patient who was walking through my door was staying with me. So out of 30 patients that would come in, only 1 would decide not to contact with me. The only problem was that I wasn't feeling like I was a modern analyst. So I was feeling like a little bit of a renegade, and I wasn't really at peace exactly with what I was doing. But after a few years of working with these patients, they started telling me, you know, we've been to other therapists, and you're different. You're different from, I never stayed with any of my other therapists, but I'm staying with you. And that's when I realized that I definitely was doing something modern analytic with them, resonating with them, but even though I wasn't working with transference and resistance. And this is how I came around to the idea of a pre-analytic patient. How do you work with the principles of modern psychoanalysis, which is to join and resonate with the patient, but not work with transference and resistance, which, when a patient isn't ready to analyze themselves or be analyzed, they're going to leave because it's too frustrating. So that's my story of how I came around full circle to feeling like a modern analyst, being able to keep patients and transition them usually into a deeper experience where they would be interested in looking at their unconscious, knowing themselves, having an introspective experience. So now I would like to open the floor to find out what of the three things I want to impart my experience to you as to what is a pre-analytic patient, how do you transition them, what kind of interventions do they need. I'd like to find out what you are interested in, and then I can see if I have something to offer you. So, yes.
I was motivated especially to come today because I just started working with someone who came to me through insurance.
Mr. Wynn, can you talk so that everybody can hear you?
Okay. I was motivated to come today because I started working with a referral through an insurance company who is a social worker who got an education after getting her kids off to college. And she had a year and a half of education, and now she works at a clinic and has 27 patients, and she came to me because she's overwhelmed. And she said her clinic has a modern analytic attitude, but it's not specifically modern analytic, and I just felt we were going to get along great. I told her about the couch, fine, and I've seen her 7 times. I started to feel like she's not happy, and in the second week, she's like, I don't feel comfortable on the couch, I don't know, I want to see you, but then she turned on her side, she said, this is better. 2 weeks ago, she started to put a lifesaver in her mouth when we started, and I said, do you need that? And it's recommended that you don't eat or drink during the session. And she didn't do it. Last week she came in and said, I don't think this is for me. I want to see you when we're talking. I want this to be a conversation, and I was put off by you not wanting me to have a lifesaver. And I said, you don't have to be on the couch. And if you want, you can eat or drink. And I got up because I felt like I don't even want to talk about it. It's got to act fast before. And we had a session face-to-face, and I asked how it was, and it was good. But I am pondering, is this pre-analytic stuff?
Definitely.
Okay.
That is such a great example of how I lost all my patients for so many years. How do you tell when a person is ready for analysis and not ready? Let's start at the beginning. And I think you're doing a great job of helping her to feel comfortable in the room. She doesn't want to lie down. She wants to resist. If a patient comes into my office and has a question about themselves, for example, why does this keep happening to me? How come I'm always depressed? Why have I been divorced 3 times? Why do my children make me so angry? That person is an analytic patient. because they have a question. When a patient has a question, they're ready for an introspective experience, and they are ready to be on the couch and for you to work with the transference and the resistance. So when you said to her, we don't have the candy in here, you were working with the resistance. Now, some patients come in and they don't have a question. They have a problem. My husband is cheating on me. My caseload is overwhelming me. That's your person's problem. What are other problems patients have? My daughter is becoming a drug addict and failing school. When someone has a problem, they're not asking for analysis. They need help with the problem. And as my mother said, you're a victim to that problem. So when people have a problem, you have to help them with that problem.
Okay.
Yeah. You don't work with transference and resistance. Let me give you another example of a resistance and how I would work with it differently with an analytic patient and a pre-analytic patient. An analytic patient walks into my office with a gluten-free lemon poppy seed muffin for me. This is an analytic patient. As soon as that patient walks into the room, I'm interested in what this muffin is about. And then I wait for the patient to bring something up that relates to the muffin. So maybe the patient will say, I've been undernourished, felt undernourished my whole life. Or else the patient says, I always have to take care of people. So that's an opening for me to say, does this have to do with the muffin? Is that why you brought me a muffin? That's exploration. So you use two things, silence and exploration. Do you want to hear what I would say to the pre-analytic patient who brings me muffin? The pre-analytic patient comes in with a gorgeous gluten-free lemon poppy seed muffin. I say, oh, would you mind terribly if I ate this now? Because you're working, you're not, let's take this a step further. We frustrate the patient because in analysis you need frustration to keep talking. So if it's an impulsive patient, we might say, it would be better if you didn't bring me the muffin. Then the patient feels safe. If it's not an impulsive patient, we might say, would it help us to explore these feelings if you didn't bring me the muffin? And then the patient, you have to frustrate the analytic patient to keep the patient talking. For the pre-analytic patient, you monitor the dopamine levels in the room, not the frustration. If there's no frustration, you monitor, is there enough dopamine, because that keeps the patient coming. Now you could also work with the transference. Am I going on too much with this?
No.
If you're working with the transference, we also work with transference with the analytic patient. So then we might say, we would explore, should I feed you? Right? We work with transference and resistance. The pre-analytic patient, the transference is so shallow. It's not you're like a category in the person's head, therapist, like a plumber or whatever. And you are just supposed to help, and if you don't help, they leave. It's just so, you can't, there's nothing to work. It's not exactly a non-transference. It's just, the nature of the transference is, I'm a nice person, you're a nice person, the rest of the world is horrible. So when they bring you that muffin, I'm a nice person, you're a nice person. That's the feeling that you're in with that patient. And if you are in a different place, the patient who isn't ready for the introspective experience, it's just not going to, you're not going to be resonating with that patient.
Well, I was just wondering how long you could let that go on for, or could it be indefinite, having a pre-analytic patient?
That's a great question. It's kind of a question of when does the pre-analytic patient become analytic, or because you don't, with an analytic patient, they need frustration gratification to keep talking. And so how do you know that when a patient moves into the more analytic experience? I'm going to tell you a story of a case and see if that helps, and then we can analyze it together. I had a pre-analytic patient who had a problem with his wife. She made him crazy. He had a premature ejaculation with her, and then he hated himself, and he had to get away from her. So I helped him to divorce his wife. He was very, very happy. He found a new girlfriend. She was very young, very beautiful. I met her, and he started to make me soups. And these soups were unbelievable. The first soup was a chilled melon soup that was the kind of thing where when you eat it, you just thank God that you're alive. It was just a transcendent experience. And the second soup was a chilled gazpacho that was slightly spicy. This third soup was a vegetable soup with some chipotle. Again, just unbelievable soups. About a year and a half into his treatment, I raised his feet. He'd been on the couch. Pre-analytic patients could be on the couch, by the way. I just tell him, go into the oasis. So he sat up from the couch and he looked at me and he said, you've got to be kidding. I was a little taken aback, and he said, I thought we were friends. I see now that this is just a business to you, and that's all that this means to you. And I want you to know that I had a doctor I loved, primary care, who raised his fee on me, and I never went back. And in fact, he kept leaving. He'd left everything. So I said, I tried a few things. I said, hasn't a friend ever asked you for money? He didn't like that. He said, we had an agreement. That was the agreement we had. It was working for me, and you're breaking the agreement. So I said, look, I want you to keep coming. Just forget it. Forget I ever said anything. And he kept coming, and I didn't see another soup for a year. Finally, he brought in another soup. It was a beef barley soup. And it was disgusting. It was sour and thin, and the noodles had been frozen, and they couldn't finish it. Then he brought in a beef barley soup, same thing. It was revolting.
You so, eat it during the session?
Yeah, like after he left, it was my lunch. It was divine until these new set of soups. I'm analyzing these soups. You have to analyze everything. And I'm thinking, we can't seem to return to that place where I'm okay, you're okay, the rest of the world is horrible, because this is not okay. This is disgusting. And I developed a nickname for this patient, son of a bitch bastard. So another year goes by. We're now into the 4th year of treatment. Son of a bitch bastard walks into the door. He opens the door. He's got a little smile on his face. He closes the door behind him, and he stands there and he says, I have wonderful news for you. And I said, oh. He said, today is our last day of treatment. Today is our last session. So I said, oh, that's wonderful. He got on the couch and he said, you know, I'm there. You've helped me so much. I'm a happy man now. I know how to deal with my self-hate. I'm in this wonderful relationship. Everything is going so great. I think I'm done. So I said to him, I had a question for him. This was actually a question that Faye Newsome had designed, and I had been holding on to it, but it was an incredible question. And I said to him, there's still one thing that I don't understand, and that is, how come you like to give people what you want, but you don't like to give them what they want? He said, which really surprised me, I knew you were going to ask me that. Been with me for 4 years, you get to learn how your analyst thinks and analyzes things. So he said, well, let me think about it, I'll come back next week. He came back the following week and he said, I asked my children whether I'm the type of person who only gives what he wants. And my children told me that they're afraid of me. And I want to learn how to give people what they want. So that day, he became an analytic patient. Treatment destructive resistances are a really good time, an opportunity to give a patient a question and see if they become interested in exploring that question. So Ms. Newsome had come up with this amazing question, and he was ready now. Things were settled enough in his life to have that introspective experience. Then we could discuss the soups, what they meant, why the ones that weren't tasty, what he was trying to do with that. And a few weeks later, I got a raise.
You asked or he gave?
He gave. It was a very small raise.
We got more work to do.
Still a little fun bitch faster thing going.
But that was 4 years, right?
Yeah, now some patients can be introduced to the idea of having a more introspective experience. You can suggest to them, gee, this is, you know, we have hidden parts of our brain. Maybe we should do psychoanalysis and find the answer to this. And within 3 months, they're free associating on the couch. So they have to get introduced. I live in a Catholic suburb of Boston. The clientele that I get is not a sophisticated. Sometimes they just really don't know what psychoanalysis is. And sometimes they just don't want to have the introspective experience, and then you just stay in the moment. I had a pre-analytic patient a couple of weeks ago bring me, she came in with a 2-for-1 sushi. Now, 2 for 1, what does that mean to you? It's like merging 2 in 1. And I love to merge, and I love sushi. It just doesn't get any better than that. I enjoy eating that sushi. Another patient brought me cookies. This woman is a non-stop talker. No one in town could ever stand her because she'd start talking. So I invited her into treatment. She was delighted to come into treatment. She brought me food all the time. She brought me a tray of cookies. I said, would you mind terribly if I ate this now? She said, yes, as a matter of fact, it would go well with the tea that I brought you last Christmas. So I kid you not, I walked into my kitchen with her trailing after me. I work out of my home, talking the whole time. I made myself a cup of tea, didn't offer her one because it didn't seem to be at what she wanted. And I took my tea and my cookies back into the session and enjoyed them. And she was very happy to see that I was willing to ingest her.
But with the gentleman, I mean, I'm just trying to put something together here. It sounds like you still waited for the contact in order to make the transition. Like you didn't try to...
I had tried before to explore the soups, and fortunately it wasn't so early in the treatment that people, when you start exploring before they're analytic, feel rejected somehow. They feel misunderstood and like they've had their hands slapped. It doesn't lead to greater communication. It leads to not enough dopamine. You cannot frustrate pre-analytic patients or work with the transference and resistance. So when the transference changes, now treatment destructive resistances are a great opportunity to plant a question and see if the patient's interested in exploring the question. But changes in the transference is another good time